My impressions from our visit is just the human suffering, to see it up close and firsthand. These are some of the most vulnerable people in Venezuela that are there. Children with disabilities, families facing long-term illness, very poor people to begin with. So it's just stunning. And I want to say that the Colombian government and President Duque deserves a tremendous amount of credit, as well as the Colombian people, for taking on this humanitarian crisis with so much compassion. And we're grateful to them. On the humanitarian response, it's an impressive collection that continues to grow every day, and that's just a U.S. contribution. International partners are continuing to contribute to this effort. This is going to be an ongoing process. This is not about delivering one shipment or 5. I mean, Venezuela is going to need humanitarian aid for the foreseeable future, even after the Maduro regime falls. And one of the things that is being talked about now is providing the cash so that rather than having to continue to ship in aid, it can be purchased locally, particularly inside of Colombia, because it's a lot quicker and you're more nimble in terms of delivering the aid that they need. The 23rd, Saturday, is shaping up to be a pretty important and potentially historic day in the history of Venezuela, in the history of this hemisphere, and certainly one of the most important days since this tragedy began. National Guard members, soldiers on the Venezuelan side are going to have to choose very soon whose side are they on. Are they on the people's side, or are they on the side of an immoral, illegitimate criminal regime? And many of the military commanders have a choice to make already. Are they going to side with the people that they have sworn to protect, or are they going to protect a regime whose days are numbered? And the opposition and their plans, they are well aware of the dangers. They understand the dangers that are involved here. Venezuela and Cuba could easily place, and I expect they will place, agitators in the crowd to provoke violence and blame it on the opposition and justify a crackdown. Obviously, there are criminal elements and organizations already on the Venezuelan side of the border who operate with the support of the Maduro regime. He basically uses these motorcycle gangs and street criminals and empowers them. So everyone's aware of the dangers that are at play here. But ultimately, there's nothing more important than human freedom, a freedom that we in this nation deeply believe comes from God. And it's easy to lose freedom, and it's very difficult to regain it. And it is something that no effort is too hard, no sacrifice too great. And the opposition and the people of Venezuela understand that. And as long as they're standing for freedom, America is going to stand with them. It is an international crime to deny food and medicine to civilians. Even in the middle of warfare, it would be a crime to deny food and medicine to civilians. So they will be committing a crime if they deny it. We will know who they are. The world will know who they are. And they'll have to spend, if they decide to do so, they'll spend the rest of their lives in a prison somewhere or as fugitives of justice, unable to enjoy all the money they stole from the people of Venezuela. And the last point I would make is the Cuban regime are experts at both repression and at staging events. We fully expect that they will try to put within the crowd of real Venezuelans agent provocateurs, instigators who are going to be there to sort of provoke violence so they can justify a violence response on the part of the regime. I say that ahead of time because everyone's going to know it. It's a trick that isn't going to work. Yeah, what was most stunning about it was the thought that behind me was millions of dollars of food and medicine, and in front of me were millions of people who are going to die without access to it. And the only thing standing in the way are containers and an overturned truck put there by the government or by the illegitimate regime in Venezuela. And it was to be that close, to have see sort of physical manifestation of that blockade, of the fact that Venezuela today has within it a criminal organization that calls itself a government but isn't, that is willing to deny their very own people food and medicine in an effort to be able to control them. Look, the United States retains the right to protect its national interests and its national security anywhere in the world, and Venezuela is no exception. But Venezuela's already been invaded by the Cubans, who've taken over every organism of that government. In fact, it's shameful that a Venezuelan military officer would allow their men and women under their command to be tortured and jailed by foreign agents of another country and another government. And I would say the only invasion that people have talked about around me is an invasion of food and medicine. And if you are a regime that is afraid of food and medicine, that tells you a lot about what kind of regime you are. It isn't a partisan fight. I mean, the Speaker of the House, the Democratic leader of the Senate, the overwhelming majority of our colleagues in both parties are supportive of U.S. policy. I would say the pro-Maduro elements in Congress are minuscule, if any, except for some people that have said stupid things, because a lot of them have been paying attention to Venezuela for like 72 hours and now they think they're experts, but they don't know what they're talking about. But I largely don't pay attention to them because if you look across the board, it's been a bipartisan issue, and it should be one. Human rights and democracy should be a bipartisan issue. It is for me. It always has been.
In the press interview, you said that you thought it would be a mistake to declare national security for getting funds for the border wall. What do you say about that today after it has been?
Well, first of all, I want everyone to understand that that's broken out. In addition to the money that's in the budget, there's money in there from the forfeiture fund, which you didn't need an emergency authority for, and there's money in there from the counter-drug programs. Between those two things and what's already been appropriated, he gets close to $4.8 billion, I mean, pretty close to his ultimate numbers. So the last piece, which is the one he's using the emergency declaration on, is military construction. So just as a matter of policy, our military construction budget is already behind schedule and compared to where we need to be for some of our facilities around this country. So I think it's a bad idea. I also think it's a bad idea because usually emergency declarations are for situations in which Congress doesn't have time to organize itself to vote on it. But Congress just had a vote on this and it just expressed itself. And so I think it's a bad idea, whether the law is currently written permits it or not. If it does, then I think it's a moment to sort of study whether Congress has delegated too much power to the executive. But I just think it's a bad idea for a lot of reasons, but one of them being that we really can't afford to be taking money out of Mayport and Eglin and Southcom and JADF South and Tyndall Air Force Base, and that needs to be reconstructed. Our military facilities in some parts of these countries, the country need some substantial upgrade.
Will both of you vote to stop it?
What's that, I'm sorry?
Will both of you vote to stop?
Well, I don't know what vote we're talking about. It depends on how it's crafted. I most certainly, we don't need to stop the first two. He has the authority to do the drug contingency, and he has the authority to use the forfeiture funds. Those are not within debate. So I think what you're asking is, would I vote to stop the use of military construction funds? And the answer is, as I've said from the beginning, I want to see who drafts the resolution and what it says in there. But I would go further and say that if, in fact, what he is doing is legally authorized, I think we should go further and examine whether or not the Emergency Declaration Act itself should be reformed so that it doesn't become a subject of abuse in the future.
What confidence do you have in Elliot Abrams, considering the amount of flack he's getting on the left for what happened in Iran-Contra, specifically flying in humanitarian aid that also wound up doubling his military aid and involve us in a conflict? What's the likelihood, and what confidence do you have?
Well, I believe all these humanitarian flights have members of the media in them. So they've invited the media to go on these flights, and I think they're going to continue to do that. So I think that's democracy dies in darkness. Isn't that the saying somebody has out there? So that's why they want these sort of, I know. Yeah. But my point being is that the media isn't, I believe, in fact, some of the networks or stations here have been invited to ride along. I think the Miami Herald had someone on one of the flights that left from Homestead. So I would encourage them to continue to do that. I would just say this, I'm not commenting on, the president's been very clear it's his decision to make, and he's been very clear that every option is on the table, and that means a lot of different things, and that's not for me to make that decision. But if the United States ever acts militarily anywhere in the world, it's not the kind of thing that you'll know about it. I mean, you'll notice it pretty quickly. We have capabilities that no one in human history has ever had, but again, the only invasion we want to see is food and medicine, and the only invasion that's already happened is the Cuban government.